I'm your module leader for Business Research Methods, Dr. Xiangping Du. This presentation is about research approach to theory development and how the knowledge of your research is developed, with reference to the two main concepts, deductive and inductive, which is discussed in the last presentation under methodology. Research approach is also the second layer of Saunders' onion ring, which refers as approach theory development. As can be seen from this diagram, it's quite visually illustrated the difference between deductive and inductive. Deductive is theory-led, there's a theory, should be developed from the literature, and from the literature, there's some theoretical concepts, and then you may develop them into your hypothesis. And from the hypothesis, and then you then test the hypothesis using observations or using your own research. It could be primary research you're doing, questionnaires, for example, online surveys. And then from your own observation or your own research, you're coming to confirm or to test the hypotheses whether they're true or false. On the contrary, inductive is bottom up. So the theory is developed at the very end, and then the research starts from the observation. So where you may have observed a social phenomenon, or you may just conduct the social research and primary research based on what you've observed, you're interested in, and then from what the research you found there are any patterns, and based on the patterns you may come up with tentative hypotheses, and then which can be developed in a theory. So we call deductive is theory-led, top-down, and the inductive is observation-based, which is bottom-up. So another two diagrams, which with word explanation is quite, even clearly demonstrate how the difference between these two. So deductive approach usually begins with a theory-driven hypothesis which guide data collection and analysis, while inductive research begins with a research question and the collection of empirical data, which means primary data, which are used to generate hypotheses and theory. So this is the clear distinction. Once the theory starts, and then test the theory using your research, and the other one is start with the research and the collection of the data, and then generate a theory. So besides the two main deductive and inductive research approaches and the way how a theory or knowledge is generated, there's a third approach which is called abductive approach. Abductive approach is technically the combination of both deductive and inductive approach, but there's a sequence between them two. So usually abductive research starts with the inductive approach and then finish with the deductive approach instead of the other way around. And actually there's a fourth approach which is called non-traditional approach, which may be different from the inductive, deductive or abductive. It could be a storytelling type of research or a reflective type of research, which is very rare in a business management research. This is another very clear visual demonstration of the difference between deductive, inductive, and abductive. So I leave it to you to have a look at it at your own time. And which research approach you adopt for your research really depends what the purpose of your research, as mentioned earlier, so what your research sets to do, and kind of what knowledge you want to develop out of your research. I use an example on this in the Saunders core textbook. If you look into an issue with violence at work and its effect on the stress level of the staff. So there's violence at work, and then you look in stress of the violence brought for the staff members. So you may use deductive approach. You may read something, you think, oh my God, that's something very serious. you may start your research by reading relevant literature, books, journals, or news articles. And then from your reading or from the literature, you may develop hypotheses. You may find out from the literature it seems staff who work directly with the public are more likely to experience threats of violence and resultant stress. So that's what you have drawn from the literature. And then now you may test the hypothesis to see, whether that is the case. That's what other people have done. So that's the kind of hypothesis you draw from the existing literature. But you want to find out whether that's the case, nowadays or in the particular context of your research. And then you may now identify the target population working with the public. And then you may administrate a questionnaire, online survey, to a large number of this population who work in the public in order to test the hypothesis. So in this case, you've got to be very particular or careful about what do you mean or how do you define violence. Is that verbal or physical, the extent to which the violence that you refer to in your research? Yeah, because when you are doing questionnaires, so the participant may not be able to have the opportunity to ask you for clarification. So therefore, you have to be very clear what do you mean. And also, you have to standardize the stress response. So you're looking for stress. So again, what extent the stress? Is that sadness or a bit anger or the stress days of work or sick, or the stress may have come to a point where the staff member has to see a counselor or mental or well-being kind of team. So this has to be very clearly defined in your research in order to measure what you want to investigate. So it's very likely, if you refer back to the purpose of the research, it's very likely this research is an explanatory research, that you look into the causal relationship, whether the people working in public are more likely to experience stress, and which will result in stress. So as discussed, it is clearly using questionnaire to a large number of people is a quantitative research method. Yeah. And they're using this deductive methodological approach. And referring to the ontology, it's very likely this is an objectivist research. So obviously you rely on the big number of the participants and then to find the truth. So there should be one truth, either yes or no. And then in terms of epistemology, it's very positivist epistemology, isn't it? Again, so you look into the truth, you look into the objective view from the big number, and then you clearly define violence and the stress. So these are all away from you as a researcher. You don't have much engagement within it. So the second approach to this research on violence at work and the stress level of member staff, it could be inductive approach. Again, you may not directly measure the relationship or the between the variables, and you may just adopt inductive approach. You may say, it seems there's a social phenomenon, these things happen. And then what you do, you probably go straight up to those people who have suffered or experienced violence at work, and then you speak to them or interview them in a more research tone. Interview them or do focus groups with a group of people, and then find out their feelings and the stress they have been through after facing the violence. And then you may explore, what kind of violence or to what extent the violence they have been through and how they coped with them, or what is their view and what is the impact on them. So what is the stress caused of this violence? So all this research, as you can say, you don't have to rate at this stage, or maybe you may engage very, very, very brief literature review, but the main data, your main finding would be from your main research, just from the population that you have spoken to. And then you may come into conclusions then you see, oh yes, the people who work in public seems to face more violence and cause more stress. Or you may come up with different theories. You may find female are likely to face violence at work and be more stressed than male. So things from your own research using an inductive approach so gives you a lot of in-depth insight, because you as a researcher took part in this research, and you can kind of engage and interact with the researcher. You may slightly change your conversation because the focus might be slightly changed, and there's other stories, different kind of stress before even beyond your understanding, for example, and you may navigate into a little bit more into, oh, you suffer that kind of stress, and then that leads you to whatever. So this is very likely, if we refer back to the purpose of research, is exploratory research, where you give you opportunity to investigate into the in-depth feelings, insight, and understanding of the people who face violence. And again, it is a very typical qualitative research when you're using interviews or focus groups. And obviously, in terms of ontology, it's a subjectivism, isn't it? It's very subjective, because you as the researcher, as part of the research, and you may, as we said, slightly navigate away from the question and then more engage in the participant in terms of each individual cases. Yeah. And obviously, in terms of the epistemology, it's very, very clear as an interpretatism, isn't it, and a constructivism, because each person's experience might be different in terms of the role they worked, or the society they interact with, or the sector, the industry they work with. And then from then, you may generate a pattern or theory to say people working in particular industries seem to have face more violence, or people with particular gender, or female or male, are likely to face more violence. So you generate the theory from your own research. So this is inductive approach. The third approach is called abductive approach. As we said, so you must start with inductive approach, like what we said. After finishing your interview, you generate the pattern. So female are likely to face more violence than male in particular industries, for example. And then that's your hypothesis. And then now you may design a questionnaire and try to test the hypothesis and apply your questionnaire to a larger sample, probably within this industry, to find out whether that is the case or not. Yeah. So you try to use this large figure, the numbers, to test this hypothesis generated from your inductive approach, from your interview. And then after that, you may refine your conceptual model or your conclusion. So where it is typical inductive approach, and then move on to deductive approach, and then your conclusion might vary accordingly. So this is, again, is a combination of qualitative and quantitative research method, isn't it? So in terms of the research paradigm, so we call it is a pragmatist research. So where you look into reality, it's constantly negotiated, debated, or interpreted. You don't trust that whatever you did the first time is right. So you kind of re-look into it by a different method. Yeah. And in terms of the epistemology, you perceive knowledge should be examined using best possible tools. So instead of just rely on one tool, and then that's the knowledge you've generated. So it's important that we all recognize these three different approaches and how they are connected with the research philosophy we discussed in the previous presentation, especially their relationship with the ontology, epistemology, and methodology, which we may refer to research paradigm. Again, I hope this presentation helps you to give some theoretical underpinning of your research. And obviously, if you need any help, and then please, get it from the relevant parties. And as the key researcher, again, you're the independent researcher, and you have to be self-motivated, and you have to think to yourself what is your own belief assumptions and what is the philosophical underpinning, what is the ontology, epistemology, or methodology, or the paradigm of your own research. Okay, so I always say it's important to understand the philosophy, because whatever you believe in guided you, and then how do you conduct your research. So the reflexivity is important. So the way how you conduct research and then what you do with your research is very much, says what kind of researcher you are. All right, all the best.